There's a specific kind of story that comes along once in a while that makes you question everything you thought you understood about the limits of human audacity. Not the kind of audacity that comes from confidence or ambition or even from a specific kind of institutional overreach we cover regularly on this channel. A different kind. The kind that requires a person to look their neighbors in the eye every single day for years, to attend meetings and send notices and collect money and issue fines and make rules, while knowing the entire time that the foundation beneath everything they're doing is not just weak or compromised, but completely absent. I'm talking about the specific audacity of pretending to be something you are not, in a context where the pretending has real and documented consequences for real people for years without being caught. I'm talking about the specific kind of person who can walk into a community meeting room and sit at the head of the table with a nameplate that says HOA President and conduct the meeting with complete authority and collected the dues and issued the fines and enforced the rules and told her neighbors what they could and could not do with their own homes for over 4 years without anyone discovering that she had never been elected to the position she was occupying, that the election she claimed to have won had never taken place, that the authority she was exercising had never been granted to her by anyone, that the HOA she was claiming to lead was, in the most technical and legally precise sense of the word, hers in no way whatsoever. Her name is Gloria, and this is the story of how 4 years of completely fabricated authority came apart in a single Tuesday evening board meeting that none of the participants expected to be anything other than routine. The homeowners of Pinecrest Village, a planned community of 112 homes in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, had been paying dues, accepting fines, complying with rules, and living under the authority of an HOA president who had never been elected. They had been doing this for 4 years and 3 months. When they found out, the situation that unfolded was one of the most legally and financially complex HOA disasters we have ever encountered on the HOA files. Because when the president is not the president, the fines are not the fines, the rules are not the rules, and the money is not where the money should be. Welcome to the HOA files. Pinecrest Village is the kind of community that appears in real estate listings with photographs of the entrance feature, the one with the stone pillars and the seasonal flower plantings and the neighborhood name in brushed metal letters. It was developed 18 years ago on the east side of Columbus, close enough to the city to be convenient and far enough to feel suburban in a way that appeals to the specific population of professional families and empty nesters who make up the majority of its residents. The homes are quality construction, mostly colonials and two-story traditionalists in the $400,000 to $600,000 range. The streets are well-maintained, and the mature landscaping that has developed over 18 years gives the community a settled, established character. The HOA at Pinecrest Village administers everything that a well-run community association is supposed to administer. The common areas, including a pool, a small fitness center in the clubhouse, 3 pocket parks, and the entrance features. The community's architectural standards, governing everything from paint colors to fence styles to holiday decoration periods. The enforcement of community rules about lawn maintenance, parking, and various exterior property standards. And the collection and management of the monthly dues, which were $280 per household, representing a total monthly collection from the community's 112 homes of approximately $31,360 per month. Annual dues revenue of approximately $376,000. I want you to hold that number in mind as this story develops. The governance structure of Pinecrest Village was a standard 5-member board elected annually by the community's homeowners. The board positions were president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, and at-large member. Ohio HOA law required that board elections be conducted annually at a noticed meeting where all homeowners had the opportunity to vote. The terms were 1 year, renewable. The president was elected directly by the homeowners rather than appointed by the board from among its members, which is a structure in some communities. This direct election structure turns out to be important because the specific fraud at the center of this story was only possible because of a governance gap that the community's HOA management company failed to catch for over 4 years. The story begins 3 years before Gloria, with a man named Harold. Harold was the genuine, legitimately elected HOA President of Pinecrest Village for 2 terms, a total of 2 years. He was in his early 60s, a retired insurance executive, the kind of person who joins HOA boards because they have the organizational skills and the time and a genuine belief that well-governed communities are better places to live. He was competent and fair, and nobody particularly loved him or hated him because he ran the HOA the way a competent and fair person runs an HOA, without drama and without the specific personality pathologies that produce the kinds of stories we usually cover. At the end of his 2nd term, Harold announced that he would not be seeking a 3rd term. He had grandchildren in Florida he wanted to spend more time with. He recommended that the community find a successor and thanked everyone for the experience. The annual election meeting was scheduled for the following October. It was posted on the community bulletin board at the entrance, on the community website, and through the management company's email distribution list. Nominations for all 5 board positions were solicited in the September newsletter. 3 people submitted nominations for the president position. Gloria, who had been the at-large member for 1 term, a neighbor named Frank, a civil engineer in his 40s who had been in the community for 6 years, and a woman named Ruth who had served as secretary for 2 terms and who several community members considered the most qualified candidate. The election meeting was held on a Thursday evening in October. Approximately 35 homeowners attended in person, which was a better-than-average turnout for Pinecrest Village annual elections. Absent homeowners had been given the option to submit proxy votes, and approximately 22 proxy votes had been submitted and were on file with a management company representative who was administering the election. The meeting proceeded. Nominations were confirmed. Brief statements were made by the 3 presidential candidates. Then the votes were cast, and the proxy votes were counted. Ruth won. She received 41 votes. Gloria received 19 votes. Frank received 12 votes. Ruth was the new HOA president of Pinecrest Village. And here is where the story takes its extraordinary turn. Because Gloria did not accept this result, not in the sense of challenging it through appropriate channels, not in the sense of requesting a recount or raising a procedural objection, in the sense of simply deciding, apparently privately and without informing anyone, that she was going to be the HOA president regardless of what the vote had produced. What happened in the days and weeks following the election was reconstructed much later, after the truth came out, through interviews and document review and the specific kind of forensic accounting and governance archaeology that an HOA fraud investigation requires. So what I am about to describe was not known to the community at the time. It was pieced together afterward from emails and documents and the accounts of people who had interacted with Gloria during this period and had not understood what they were seeing. Ruth had won the election on a Thursday evening. The following Monday morning, Gloria sent an email to the HOA management company. The email was sent from her personal email address, which was also the address on file with the management company as the outgoing at-large board member. The email said that she was reaching out to discuss the transition of board responsibilities following the annual meeting and asked for a call that week. The management company representative who received this email was a woman named Donna, who had been the community manager for Pinecrest Village for approximately 2 years. Donna scheduled a call with Gloria for Wednesday. On the Wednesday call, Gloria told Donna that she had been elected president at the Thursday meeting and that she was reaching out to begin the transition of responsibilities from Harold's outgoing administration. She said she would need access to the board communication systems, the community's financial accounts as they related to the board's oversight function, and the various vendor and contractor relationships that the board president administered. Donna took this at face value. She had not attended the Thursday meeting. She had received a brief summary from the previous management company representative who had administered the election, but that summary, which later became a critical piece of evidence, was notably incomplete. It confirmed that the election had taken place and that all 5 board positions had been filled, but it had been written hastily by someone who was in the process of transitioning off the account, and it did not specify by name who had won each position. It just confirmed that positions had been filled. Donna had no reason to doubt Gloria. Gloria was calling from an email address on file, identifying herself by name, and representing that she had been elected at the meeting that Donna knew had occurred. Donna began the transition process. Over the following 2 weeks, Gloria was integrated into the management company's systems as the board president of Pinecrest Village. She received president-level access to the community's administrative systems. She began receiving the communications and financial reports that the president received. She was introduced to the various vendor and contractor representatives who interacted with the HOA. What about Ruth? Ruth had won the election. Ruth had been at the meeting. Ruth was expecting to be contacted about her new role as HOA president. Nobody contacted Ruth. Ruth called the management company after 2 weeks had passed without hearing anything. She spoke to Donna. She said she had been elected president at the annual meeting and wanted to know when the transition would take place. Donna told her that she had already been in contact with the new board president and that the transition was underway. Ruth said that she was the new board president. Donna said that the person she had been speaking to had represented herself as the newly elected president. Ruth said that person was not the president. She provided Donna with her vote count. 41 votes. A clear majority. There was a very uncomfortable silence on the phone. Donna told Ruth that she needed to review the situation and would call her back. She called Gloria first. Gloria's response to Donna's call was the single most audacious thing in this entire story. She told Donna that there had been a discrepancy in the vote counting at the meeting and that a review of the proxy votes had resulted in a corrected total that showed her winning by a narrow margin. She said this review had been conducted by Harold as the outgoing president before he had departed for Florida. She said the corrected results had been provided to the board members. There was no such review. There was no corrected total. Harold had not conducted any such process. He was in Florida and had had no further involvement with Pinecrest Village governance after the meeting. But Donna did not know this. She had not attended the meeting. She had an incomplete summary of the meeting's results. She had now received 2 conflicting claims from 2 different people about who had won the election. She made a decision that seemed reasonable at the time and turned out to be catastrophically consequential. She said she would need to obtain the original paper ballots and proxy votes from the meeting to resolve the discrepancy. The original ballots were in the possession of the management company's previous representative, the one who had administered the election and then transitioned off the account. Donna contacted him. He said the ballots were in a box of files that he had left with the management company's main office during the transition. You need to locate them. He looked. The box was not immediately findable in the office storage area. He looked more thoroughly. He could not find the ballots. They were eventually found, but not for 6 weeks. By the time they were found, Gloria had been functioning as the HOA president for 6 weeks. She had conducted a board meeting. She had sent community communications. She had approved expenditures. She had signed the management contract renewal as HOA president. When the ballots were finally located and counted, they confirmed what Ruth had said. Ruth had won, 41-19. The management company brought this finding to the HOA board. All 5 board members were contacted. The finding was that Ruth had won the election and that Gloria's representation of herself as president had been based on a misrepresentation. Gloria was contacted by Donna directly. Donna told her what the ballot count showed. She asked Gloria to explain the discrepancy between the ballot count and what Gloria had told her. Gloria provided an explanation that was creative but not persuasive. She said there had been procedural irregularities at the meeting that she believed had affected the vote count. She said she intended to raise these issues with the board. She said she did not believe the ballot count reflected the legitimate result of the election. Donna told her that the management company would need to correct the board records to reflect the actual election result and that Ruth would be recognized as the legitimate board president. Gloria said she would need to consult with her attorney. She did consult with her attorney. Her attorney apparently told her what a competent attorney would tell someone in her situation, which was that the ballot count was the election result, and that continuing to represent herself as president in defiance of that count would be inadvisable. Gloria went quiet for about a week. During that week, Donna was working on correcting the board records and preparing to contact Ruth about formally assuming the president role. And then something happened that changed everything. Ruth had a heart attack. It was not related to this situation. It was a genuine medical emergency that kept Ruth in the hospital for 2 weeks and then in cardiac rehabilitation for approximately 3 months. Her physician advised her to significantly reduce her stress and her commitments for the near-term future. Ruth told a management company that she needed to step down from the board entirely for health reasons. She sent a written resignation. The resignation created a vacancy. The board's bylaws allowed the remaining board members to appoint a replacement to fill a midterm vacancy rather than holding a special election. The 4 remaining board members, who were the vice president, the treasurer, the secretary, and the at-large member, were supposed to conduct a vote to fill the vacancy. Gloria was the at-large member. In the vote to fill the presidential vacancy, the 4 board members voted 2-2. There was no majority. The bylaw provision for this situation required that in the event of a tie vote to fill a vacancy, the matter would be decided by the board member with the longest continuous service on the board. Gloria had the longest continuous service. She had been on the board for 1 year as at-large member and had been serving in the disputed capacity for 6 weeks before that. By the bylaw's tiebreaker provision, Gloria was appointed to fill the presidential vacancy. She became president, legitimately, this time through a process that was technically correct if somewhat irregular. She had a genuine appointment from a board. She had a genuine role. She was actually the president now. She had also, during the 6 weeks between her misrepresentation to Donna and the tiebreaker appointment, conducted board business, represented herself as president to vendors and community members, and signed a contract renewal as president. All of this had occurred when she was not president and had been president through fabrication rather than legitimate authority. The management company determined that the easiest path forward was to treat the period of Gloria's fraudulent representation as a regrettable administrative error, document the correction, and move forward with her legitimate appointment as the official record going forward. This decision, which was understandable in the context of a management company that had made a significant procedural error and wanted to minimize the visibility of that error, was catastrophically wrong, because it gave Gloria something she would not otherwise have had. It gave her legitimacy, and with legitimacy, she could operate openly and indefinitely. For 4 years and 3 months after her appointment, Gloria ran Pinecrest Village the way the specific kind of person who fraudulently assumes a position of authority and then has that authority legitimized runs things. With complete control, with comprehensive knowledge of every lever of power available to her, with the specific intensity of someone who knows that their hold on the position is precarious and who compensates for that precariousness by making themselves so thoroughly integrated into every function of the HOA that removing them would feel more disruptive than keeping them. And with a specific financial agenda that she pursued quietly and consistently throughout the 4 years, in ways that the community did not understand until the truth came out. Let me describe how Gloria ran Pinecrest Village before I get into the financial specifics, because understanding the governance is essential to understanding how the financial situation developed without anyone noticing for as long as it did. Gloria was a genuinely competent HOA administrator. This is important, and I do not want to minimize it. The community's common areas were well maintained. The pool was operational and properly managed. The clubhouse was clean and well organized. The community's vendor and contractor relationships were professionally managed. The architectural review process functioned smoothly. Board meetings were conducted on schedule, properly noticed, with complete minutes. She was also an aggressive enforcer of community standards. During her 4-year presidency, violation notices issued to Pinecrest Village homeowners increased by approximately 300% compared to the Herald era. Fines were assessed routinely and with less of the graduated warning process that Herald had used. Appeals of violation notices were frequently denied. The fine revenue flowing into the HOA's accounts increased substantially. This was not coincidental, as we will see. Gloria ran board meetings with the specific kind of confident authority that makes other board members feel that questioning anything would be both futile and slightly rude. She came to every meeting with organized agendas, complete financial reports, and clear recommendations for every item of business. She spoke with the fluency of someone who had been fully briefed because she had briefed herself. She had answers to questions before they were asked. She had documentation for her positions. She was, in the meeting room, completely in charge. The other board members, who rotated through their positions on their annual terms, found Gloria's presidency more or less as they found it. Professional, organized, occasionally aggressive in enforcement, but consistently defensible on the specifics. Not the kind of board president who asked for approval for everything, but not the kind who was visibly doing anything wrong either. Nobody knew about the 6 weeks. Nobody knew about the fraudulent representation to the management company. The chapter had been closed, imperfectly but officially, by the management company's decision to treat it as an administrative error. The corrected records showed Gloria's legitimate appointment as the official beginning of her presidency. The earlier period had been, in the official records, erased, and the management company, carrying its own institutional embarrassment about its role in the situation, had not disclosed what had happened to anyone outside the organization. Not to the board, not to the homeowners, not to anyone. So the community did not know that their president had started her tenure through fraud. They did not know about Ruth. They did not know about the misrepresentation to Donna. They did not know about the 6 weeks. They only knew what they could see, which was an organized, professional, competent board president who ran a tight community. Until the money started to not add up. The HOA's financial accounts were managed through the management company, but overseen by the HOA's treasurer, who in the case of Pinecrest Village was a succession of different board members over Gloria's 4-year tenure. 3 different people served as treasurer during this period, each serving 1-year terms. None of them were accounting professionals. The first was a teacher. The second was a marketing manager. The third was a retired retail manager. Each of them reviewed the monthly financial reports that the management company produced and provided. Each of them was told by Gloria, when they first assumed the treasurer role, that the management company's reports were the primary financial oversight tool, and that the treasurer's role was essentially to review those reports, flag any questions, and present the financials at board meetings. Each of them did exactly this. What none of them did, because none of them had a professional accounting background, and because Gloria consistently presented the financial reports as routine and unremarkable, was conduct any kind of independent verification of the financial records. No one ever requested supporting documentation behind the management company's summary reports. No one ever asked to see original bank statements. No one ever requested an independent audit. This was the gap that Gloria was using. The management company's monthly financial reports showed the community's dues income, its operating expenses, its reserve fund contributions, and its current balances. These reports were accurate in the sense that they reflected the transactions that had been run through the HOA's accounts. What they did not show, because the reporting format did not require it, was the granular detail of individual transactions, vendor invoices, or the complete audit trail of how specific disbursements had been approved. Gloria had been systematically diverting money from the HOA for at least 2 years of her 4-year tenure. The mechanism she used was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its scale. Pinecrest Village, like most planned communities, retained a variety of vendors and contractors for its common area maintenance, landscaping, pool management, and various repair and improvement projects. Gloria, as board president, had signatory authority on vendor invoices up to a certain threshold. Above that threshold, 2 signatures were required. Gloria had, over time, built relationships with several of the community's vendors and contractors in ways that crossed from the professional to the personal. She had directed additional business to certain vendors, had extended contracts without competitive bidding in violation of the HOA's own procurement policies, and had developed informal arrangements with certain contractors that the management company's oversight processes were not designed to detect. The specific arrangement that produced the bulk of the financial harm was with a landscaping company that had been the community's primary landscaping vendor for 3 years. The company was owned and operated by a man named Dennis who had built a relationship with Gloria over the course of the contract. Dennis submitted monthly invoices for landscaping services. The invoices were paid. Some of the invoiced services were performed. Some of them were not. The invoices included line items for services that appeared on paper to be legitimate landscaping work, but that in practice were either exaggerated descriptions of smaller actual services or entirely fictitious services that were never performed. The arrangement worked because of a specific gap in the financial oversight process. The management company processed invoice payments based on authorization from the board president. Gloria authorized the invoices. The management company paid them. The treasurer reviewed the management company's summary reports, which showed landscaping as a line item expense. The line item looked consistent with what the community should be spending on landscaping. Nobody was looking at the individual invoices. Nobody was walking the community to verify that the specific services listed on the invoices had actually been performed. The arrangement with Dennis was not the only mechanism Gloria used. There were smaller diversions through other vendor relationships and through certain discretionary expense categories that the board president administered. But Dennis was the primary channel and the primary source of what the forensic accountant would eventually determine was approximately $247,000 diverted over approximately 28 months. $247,000 from a community of 112 homes, each of whom had been paying dues and fines faithfully. And the fines were part of it too, because the 300% increase in violation notices and fine assessments had not been purely motivated by Gloria's passion for community standards enforcement. The fine revenue went into the HOA's accounts and was included in the budget surplus calculations that determined how much of the community's operating reserve was available for discretionary expenditure. By increasing fine revenue, Gloria was increasing the pool of money that flowed through the accounts in ways that made the disbursements to Dennis and other vendors look more consistent with normal operating expenses. She had built a financial architecture. It was not a simple embezzlement scheme where money was transferred from one account to another. It was a layered system of inflated vendor invoices, fictitious service charges, and increased revenue through aggressive fine collection, all designed to stay below the visibility threshold of the reporting format while systematically transferring community funds to her benefit. It worked for 28 months. And then Marcus moved in. Marcus was 44 years old, a forensic accountant who had spent 15 years working for a firm that specialized in financial fraud investigations. He had investigated everything from corporate embezzlement to municipal financial misconduct to nonprofit fund diversion. He had a specific professional skill that was rare enough to be genuinely valuable and that had served him extremely well over 15 years. He could look at a set of financial reports and identify the places where the numbers were behaving in ways that indicated something was not right, even when the something was carefully designed to look right. He and his wife Carmen had moved to Pinecrest Village from a downtown Columbus condo approximately 14 months before this story's central events. They had 2 teenage children and wanted more space and a better school district. The community had checked all the boxes. The home was beautiful. The neighbors were friendly. The community was well maintained. Marcus started attending HOA board meetings approximately 3 months after moving in, which was earlier than most new residents, because he was a professional who understood the value of understanding the financial governance of any organization he was financially connected to. He received his first monthly financial report as a homeowner in the community's email newsletter and read it with the attention of someone who reads financial reports professionally. The report looked normal. He set it aside. He received the next month's report and read it. It also looked normal. He received the 3rd month's report and read it. He found something that he noted but did not immediately flag as significant. A landscaping expense line item that was slightly higher than he expected relative to the community's size and the apparent scope of its landscaping requirements. He noted it and kept the report. Over the following 3 months, he tracked the landscaping expense line item. It was consistently higher than his professional intuition said it should be. Not dramatically higher. Not the kind of figure that would attract a non-specialist attention, but consistently elevated in a way that Marcus had learned over 15 years of financial fraud investigation to treat as a signal. He attended the next board meeting. He introduced himself to Gloria and to the other board members. He asked, politely and professionally, whether the board's financial reports included the underlying vendor invoices as supporting documentation. Gloria said that the management company maintained all supporting documentation and that it was available to homeowners upon formal request under the community's governing documents. Marcus submitted a formal request for the landscaping vendor invoices for the preceding 6 months. 3 weeks later, he received a package of documents from the management company. He took them to his home office, spread them on his desk, and spent an evening reviewing them with the professional attention of someone who knows what properly supported vendor invoices should look like and what improperly supported ones look like. Some of the invoices were fine. Standard landscaping services, appropriate pricing, documentation consistent with the scope of work described. Several of them were not fine. The not fine ones shared certain characteristics that Marcus recognized. Line items for services described in ways that were general enough to resist specific verification. Pricing for those items that was at the high end of reasonable ranges for the region. Services dated to periods when the community's documented inspection records suggested minimal landscaping activity had occurred. He made notes. He organized his notes into a preliminary summary. He sat with his summary for 2 weeks, because he was a professional who had learned that preliminary flags are not conclusions and that proper process matters, especially when the preliminary analysis points towards something serious. Then he called the management company and asked for the full 12-month vendor invoice history for all vendors, not just landscaping. The management company provided it after some delay. Marcus spent a weekend with the full invoice history. By Sunday evening, he had a documented preliminary finding that he believed warranted professional investigation. He also had a specific question that the invoice review had raised and that he did not have the answer to. He needed to know exactly how the invoices were authorized and what the approval process was. He went to the next board meeting with his preliminary findings organized in a folder and his question prepared. The board meeting was a regular monthly meeting on a Tuesday evening in September, about 14 months after Marcus had moved in. It was not expected to be anything other than routine. The agenda, posted the week before, included standard items. Financial report review, common area maintenance update, a discussion of the community's reserve fund contribution schedule. New business. Approximately 20 homeowners were present in the audience, which was above average but not dramatically so. September board meetings tended to get better attendance, because they were the first of the fall season after the summer quiet period and homeowners had been waiting for an opportunity to raise issues that had developed over the summer. Gloria opened the meeting with the specific organized efficiency that had characterized 4 years of her meetings. She moved through the preliminary items quickly. She was, as always, completely prepared. She had her notes, her reports, her agenda. She was, as always, completely in control. When the financial report item came up, Marcus raised his hand from the audience. Gloria acknowledged him. He stood and introduced himself by name and said that he had some questions about the vendor invoice records he had requested and reviewed. He then presented his preliminary findings. He did this calmly and professionally, using the specific measured language of someone who is presenting a financial analysis rather than making an accusation. He noted that certain vendor invoices contained line items that he had been unable to reconcile with the community's visible maintenance activities. He noted that the landscaping expense line item had been consistently elevated relative to comparable communities of similar size and scope. He said he believed a more thorough review of the vendor invoice documentation was warranted and that he was requesting that the board consider commissioning an independent financial audit. Gloria's response was immediate and smooth. She said that the HOA's accounts were professionally managed by a reputable management company and that the financial reports reflected accurate and properly authorized expenditures. She said that the community's landscaping vendor had been providing excellent service and that the pricing reflected the quality of work being performed. She said that homeowners requesting document reviews was certainly their right under the governing documents, but that she wanted to reassure everyone that the financial management of the community was sound. Several board members nodded. The meeting appeared to be moving past the moment. Then Patricia raised her hand. Patricia was the vice president. She was in her 50s, a retired bank compliance officer. She had been on the board for one term and had found Gloria's leadership style efficient, but occasionally opaque. She had not had specific concerns before this meeting. But Marcus's presentation had activated something in her professional brain that her bank compliance background had trained well. She asked Gloria a specific question. She asked whether the landscaping vendor invoices had been reviewed by the board as a group before authorization or whether authorization was solely at the president's discretion. Gloria said that invoices below the threshold requiring dual signatures were authorized by the president as a matter of standard HOA administrative practice. Patricia asked what the threshold was. Gloria said $5,000. Patricia asked what the average monthly landscaping invoice amount was. Gloria paused for slightly less than a second before answering. The invoices were generally in the range of $4,000 to $4,800. Patricia wrote something on her notepad. After the meeting, Patricia found Marcus in the parking lot. She introduced herself. She said she thought his questions were good ones and that she wanted to talk more. She said her background was bank compliance, and she knew what invoice irregularities looked like. She said she was going to request the complete 3-year vendor invoice history and that she would appreciate Marcus's professional input in reviewing it. Marcus said he would be glad to help. They met the following Saturday at Marcus and Carmen's kitchen table. It took them 4 hours to go through the 3-year invoice history that Patricia had obtained. By the end of the 4 hours, they had a documented preliminary finding that was significantly more concerning than Marcus's initial analysis had suggested. The numbers were off. Not slightly off. Significantly off. The landscaping invoices showed a pattern of consistent billing for services at pricing levels and service descriptions that, when compared against the community's vendor history prior to Gloria's presidency and against regional market rates, were substantially inflated. The pattern was consistent and deliberate and had been running for approximately 28 months. They also found something that neither of them had expected to find. In reviewing the invoice authorization records, Patricia identified a period of approximately 6 weeks at the beginning of Gloria's presidency where invoices had been authorized with Gloria's signature, but where the board records showed that Gloria had not yet been officially appointed to the president role. This was the 6 weeks. The 6 weeks that the management company had treated as an administrative error and buried in the records. The 6 weeks that nobody at Pinecrest Village knew about. Patricia looked at these 6 weeks of records for a long time. Then she called the management company on Monday morning and asked for the complete governance records from the transition period following Harold's presidency. What she received, and what she spent an evening reviewing, was the incomplete picture that the management company's incomplete records told. It was not the complete picture, but it was enough to generate a very specific set of questions. She called Marcus. She told him what she had found. She told him she thought the situation had dimensions that went beyond financial irregularities and that she needed to understand the governance history of Gloria's presidency more completely. She also told him that she was going to reach out to Harold. Harold was in Florida. He had been in Florida for 4 years and 3 months. He was, by all accounts, extremely happy in Florida. He had his grandchildren nearby. He had his retirement. He had left Pinecrest Village governance in what he believed were competent hands and had thought about it rarely since. Patricia's call came on a Wednesday morning while Harold was having breakfast on the lanai. She introduced herself, explained her current role on the board, and told him she was calling about a governance question related to the presidential transition that had occurred after his final term. Harold said he was happy to help if he could. Patricia asked him about the election meeting. She asked him who had won the presidential election at that meeting. Harold said Ruth had won. He said she had received a clear majority, something in the range of 40 votes. He said he had been very pleased about it because Ruth was organized and competent and would have been an excellent president. Patricia asked Harold if he had conducted any post-meeting review of the proxy votes or any corrected vote count after the meeting. Harold said he had not. He said the vote had been clear, and he had gone home after the meeting and had received the transition communication from the management company within the week. He said he had been surprised to see that Gloria was being transitioned in as president rather than Ruth, but had assumed there was some administrative process he was not aware of, perhaps a late proxy count or some technical governance issue that had resulted in a different appointment, and had not followed up because he was leaving for Florida within 2 weeks and considered it to be fully in the management company's hands. Patricia asked Harold if he would be willing to provide a written statement about what he had observed at the election meeting. Harold said he absolutely would. He said he wanted to know what was going on. Patricia told him what she and Marcus had found: the financial irregularities, the 6 weeks of invoice authorizations from a period before Gloria's official appointment, the governance records that suggested something had happened in the transition that had not been fully documented. Harold was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that Patricia found important. He said that he had thought about Ruth a few times over the years. He had heard through the community grapevine that she had resigned from the board for health reasons and had recovered and was still living in the community. He had found it odd that she had never served as president given her clear election win, and had attributed it to the health situation. He had not known what Patricia was telling him. He had not known that Gloria's presidency had begun with a misrepresentation to the management company. Harold said he would provide a written statement. He would also, if needed, be willing to speak directly with the management company and the HOA's attorney about what he had witnessed at the election meeting. Patricia thanked him. She had what she needed. She called the HOA's attorney, a Columbus area HOA law firm that the community had retained for several years for general governance counsel. She described the situation. The attorney said she would need to review the complete record before advising, but that what Patricia was describing sounded very serious, and that the board would need to take specific actions to protect itself and the community. The attorney said one more thing that Patricia wrote down on her notepad and underlined twice. She said that if the financial irregularities were as significant as Patricia believed, and if the governance fraud was as documented as it appeared to be, this was a matter for law enforcement, as well as for civil legal proceedings. Patricia called Marcus. She told him what the attorney had said. She said that the next step was a complete independent audit and a formal report to law enforcement. She asked him if he was prepared to be involved in what was going to be a significant and complicated process. Marcus said that he was a forensic accountant who had spent 15 years investigating exactly this kind of situation. He said he was prepared. He also said he thought they needed to talk to Ruth. Ruth was 62 years old, 5 years post her cardiac event, fully recovered and living the quiet retirement she had earned after a career as a hospital administrator. She lived in the same house in Pinecrest Village that she had lived in when she had won the election 4 years earlier, the election that should have made her the HOA president and that Gloria had stolen. Ruth had known, in a general way, that something had not been right about how the election had resolved. She had called the management company. She had been told that there was a discrepancy. Then she had had her cardiac event, and the entire question had become irrelevant compared to the immediate priority of her health. She had resigned from the board and focused on recovering. In the years since, she had not thought about it much. She had made her peace with the situation. She had watched Gloria run the community with what appeared to be competence, had received her own violation notices with the equanimity of someone who had stopped caring about the politics, and had lived her quiet retirement without involving herself in community governance. When Patricia knocked on her door on a Thursday afternoon, Ruth answered in her garden clothes. She had been deadheading her fall flowers. She recognized Patricia from board meeting attendance lists and invited her in for coffee. Patricia told her everything, the complete picture, the election result that should have made her president, Gloria's misrepresentation to the management company, the 6 weeks, the management company's decision to bury the situation as an administrative error, the 4 years of Gloria's presidency, the financial irregularities that Marcus had identified, the preliminary finding of approximately $247,000 in potential diversion, the HOA attorney's advice about law enforcement. Ruth listened to all of this without interrupting. She held her coffee mug in both hands the way people hold things when they are hearing something significant and need something to hold. When Patricia finished, Ruth was quiet for a while. Then she said two things. She said she wanted to see Harold's written statement when it was ready. And she said that she was very glad she had recovered from her cardiac event because she was going to need her health for whatever was coming next. She asked how she could help. What followed over the next 6 weeks was one of the most comprehensive HOA governance and financial investigations that the Columbus area HOA law firm had been involved in. Marcus served as the forensic accounting lead, working under engagement by the HOA board with Patricia as the board's primary liaison. The HOA attorney coordinated the legal dimensions and the law enforcement interface. Harold provided his written statement from Florida and participated in 2 telephone interviews with the investigating attorneys. Ruth participated in a formal interview documenting her account of the election and the subsequent management company communication. Donna, the management company representative who had processed Gloria's fraudulent misrepresentation, was contacted by the investigation. She was visibly distressed by the process. She provided complete cooperation with the investigation, producing every document in the management company's files related to the transition period and her subsequent communications with Gloria. She also provided something that turned out to be unexpectedly significant. She had kept notes from the Wednesday phone call on which Gloria had told her she had been elected president. Donna had kept these notes in her personal files rather than the official management file, because she had been embarrassed about the situation and had wanted a record that showed she had acted in good faith based on the information she had been given. Her notes documented exactly what Gloria had told her. Those notes, combined with Harold's statement about the actual election result, were the core of the governance fraud documentation. On the financial side, Marcus's investigation expanded from the landscaping vendor to the complete vendor and contractor history. The final scope of the financial irregularities was larger than the preliminary analysis had suggested. The total amount that Marcus's forensic accounting determined had been diverted or improperly dispersed over approximately 28 months was $312,000. The landscaping arrangement with Dennis accounted for approximately $247,000 of this. The remaining $65,000 was distributed across several other vendor relationships and certain discretionary expense categories. Marcus's investigation also made a specific finding about the fine revenue. The 300% increase in violation notice issuance during Gloria's presidency had generated approximately $89,000 in fine revenue above what comparable enforcement levels would have produced. This fine revenue had gone into the HOA's accounts, had been included in the financial reports, and had been used in Gloria's financial presentations as evidence of the HOA's strong fiscal management. In effect, the aggressive fining of homeowners have been used to help camouflage the financial diversion by creating surplus revenue that made the inflated vendor expenses appear more sustainable. $89,000 in fines paid by Pinecrest Village homeowners, fines for violation notices that had been issued at 3 times the historical rate, had been used in part to make a financial fraud less visible. This finding was the one that generated the most outrage in the community when it became known. Not the $247,000 landscaping diversion, significant as that was. The idea that the fines their neighbors had been paying, fines they had accepted as legitimate HOA enforcement, had been artificially elevated to serve as cover for a financial scheme that made it personal for every homeowner in the community in a way that abstract financial diversion does not. The complete investigation report was delivered to the HOA board and to the HOA attorney at the end of 6 weeks. It was 48 pages long plus 112 pages of exhibits. Marcus told me it was one of the 3 most thoroughly documented forensic accounting reports he had produced in 15 years of practice. The report was delivered to the Columbus Police Department the following day. Gloria was not informed of the investigation before its completion and submission to law enforcement. This was a deliberate decision by the HOA attorney and the investigation team, based on the concern that early disclosure would give Gloria the opportunity to destroy documents, move funds, contact Dennis, or otherwise compromise the investigation. The board had been advised by the HOA attorney that their fiduciary duty to the community required them to allow the investigation to proceed without tipping off its subject. This meant that for 6 weeks, Patricia had been sitting in board meetings with Gloria, reviewing financial reports with Gloria, conducting the ordinary business of community governance with Gloria, while knowing what the investigation was finding. She told me this was one of the most professionally difficult 6 weeks of her life. She was a bank compliance officer by training. She was used to maintaining professional composure in difficult situations. But sitting next to someone and conducting ordinary business while knowing what she knew about what that person had done was genuinely hard. Gloria, for her part, gave no indication during this period of knowing that anything was wrong. Her board meetings were as organized and efficient as always. Her financial presentations were as smooth as always. She had no reason to suspect that Marcus's initial questions at the September meeting had grown into a formal investigation. The management company had provided the document requests without alerting her. The attorney contacts had been managed carefully. The process had been clean. The confrontation came on a Tuesday evening, 2 days after the investigation report had been submitted to the Columbus Police Department. The HOA attorney had coordinated with the investigating detective to ensure that the board's planned confrontation of Gloria at a special meeting would not compromise the criminal investigation. The detective had confirmed that they could proceed with the meeting. The special board meeting was called with 24 hours notice, the minimum required under the bylaws for a special meeting. The notice described it as a meeting to discuss community governance matters. All board members, including Gloria, received the notice. Gloria arrived at the meeting room first, as she always did. She set up her materials at the head of the table. She arranged her agenda. She was entirely the president she had always presented herself as being. When the other board members arrived, they were accompanied by the HOA attorney. Gloria looked at the attorney and at the board members' expressions, and, for the first time in 4 years, something shifted in her face. Not panic. Something more control than panic. The specific expression of someone who has been running a race and has just understood that the finish line is not where they thought it was. The attorney began the meeting. She explained that the board had conducted an independent investigation into certain governance and financial matters at Pinecrest Village. She said the investigation had produced findings that the board needed to address. She said that Gloria would have the opportunity to respond to the findings, but that the board intended to take specific actions based on what the investigation had determined. Then the attorney presented the findings. Methodically, completely, without dramatization. The election result that should have made Ruth president. Gloria's misrepresentation to the management company. The 6 weeks of unauthorized invoice authorizations. The financial irregularities identified by Marcus's forensic accounting. The $312,000 in improper disbursements. The connection to Dennis. The $89,000 in elevated fine revenue. Gloria said nothing during the presentation. She sat at the head of the table she had occupied for 4 years, and she listened to 4 years of her conduct being documented in sequence, and she said nothing. Her expression remained controlled throughout. The expression of someone who has prepared for many scenarios and is working through which response strategy is most appropriate for this one. When the attorney finished, she asked Gloria if she wanted to respond. Gloria said she wanted to consult with her attorney. The HOA attorney said she was welcome to do so and that the board was suspending the meeting to allow Gloria to make that call if she wished. She also said that regardless of any response Gloria might provide, the board intended to vote on specific actions at the conclusion of the meeting, including the suspension of Gloria from the board presidency, the retention of a new management company to assume administrative responsibilities, and a referral of the complete investigation report to law enforcement, which she noted had already occurred. Gloria made a phone call. She was outside the meeting room for approximately 20 minutes. When she came back, her expression had changed from controlled to something that was closer to the specific quality of someone who has received information from their attorney that has narrowed their options considerably. She said that she was not going to make a statement at this meeting. She said she was resigning from the board effective immediately. She stood up, collected her materials, and left the meeting room. The board conducted the remaining business of the meeting. They voted unanimously to appoint Patricia as acting board president. They voted to engage a new management company. They voted to authorize the HOA attorney to take all necessary steps to protect the community's financial interests, including pursuing civil recovery of the diverted funds. After the meeting, the 20 or so homeowners who had been in the audience, many of whom had attended because word had spread through the community that something significant was happening even if nobody knew exactly what, gathered in the parking lot. Patricia came out and told them, in general terms, what had happened. That a governance investigation had been completed, that significant financial irregularities had been identified, that law enforcement was involved, that the board had accepted the president's resignation, that she would be communicating complete information to the entire community in writing within 48 hours. The reaction in the parking lot was the specific stunned quiet that happens when a community receives information that fundamentally changes the way it understood its recent past. Then someone asked a question that was on everyone's mind. Was she really the president this whole time? Patricia took a breath. She said that was a complicated question and that the complete written communication would address it fully. She went to her car and drove home. She sat in her driveway for a few minutes. Then she called Marcus. She told him it was done. The criminal investigation into Gloria produced charges that took approximately 5 months to finalize. She was ultimately charged with theft by deception in the first degree, which is a felony in Ohio for theft of amounts over $100,000. She was also charged with telecommunications fraud for the false representations she had made in electronic communications during the scheme. Dennis was charged as a co-conspirator in the theft by deception charges. The criminal cases proceeded through the Ohio court system over approximately 18 months. Both Gloria and Dennis eventually entered guilty pleas. Gloria received a sentence of 18 months incarceration, suspended in favor of 5 years of supervised probation on the condition that she make full restitution, 600 hours of community service, and comply with all probation terms. She was also permanently barred from serving in any fiduciary capacity in any community association or nonprofit organization. Dennis received a similar sentence with a restitution obligation proportionate to his participation in the scheme. On the civil side, the HOA's recovery of the diverted funds was the central priority. The HOA attorney filed a civil judgment against both Gloria and Dennis for the full amount of the financial losses. The recovery process was complicated by the fact that the funds had been spent rather than retained in accessible accounts. The civil judgment produced partial recovery through the restitution payments required under the criminal sentence and through the forced liquidation of certain assets. The HOA also pursued a claim against the management company for its role in the situation. The management company, which had failed to verify Gloria's claimed election victory and had subsequently buried the error rather than disclosing it, had significant liability exposure. After lengthy negotiation, the management company agreed to a settlement that provided substantial additional recovery to the HOA. This settlement, combined with the criminal restitution payments, ultimately produced a total recovery of approximately $192,000 of the $312,000 that had been diverted. The community received approximately 62 cents on every dollar that had been stolen. Not complete recovery. Not justice in the sense of making everyone completely whole, but substantially better than the zero that many comparable fraud victims in HOA contexts receive. The question of the fines was handled separately. The board, under Patricia's leadership, commissioned a review of every violation notice and fine assessment issued during Gloria's presidency. The review was conducted against the community's historical enforcement records and against the specific CC&R provisions that each notice had cited. The review found that approximately 31% of the violation notices issued during Gloria's tenure had been either clearly unsupported by the CC&R provisions cited, issued without the required prior warning notice that the community's bylaws specified for first offenses, or assessed at fine levels that exceeded the graduated schedule in the governing documents. Refunds were calculated and issued to affected homeowners. The total refund amount was approximately $68,000. Marcus was one of the homeowners who received a refund. He had received 4 violation notices during Gloria's presidency, 3 of which the review determined had been improperly issued. He received a refund of $450. He told me this was the specific amount that he thought about least in the entire situation. What he thought about was the process, that the process had worked, that the documentation and the professional skills and the right legal framework had produced an outcome that was, if not perfect, genuinely close to what justice required. Ruth was elected HOA President of Pinecrest Village at the special election called to fill the vacancy created by Gloria's resignation. She ran unopposed. She received 67 votes, the highest vote total any presidential candidate had received in the community's history. She was 62 years old. She was 5 years past a cardiac event that her physician had told her might have been career-ending in terms of her ability to take on high-stress commitments. Her physician, when told about the election, apparently said something that Ruth quoted to me with a smile. He said that some people need a purpose to stay healthy and that she was probably one of them. So he was going to tell her to take it easy while privately expecting her to do exactly the opposite. She became the HOA president of Pinecrest Village 4 years and 3 months after she had first won that election. She told me that she thought about Harold on the day she was officially installed. She thought about the election night, the vote count, the specific quiet satisfaction she had felt when the result was announced. She thought about the phone call to the management company 2 weeks later, the confusion, the inexplicable situation. She thought about the cardiac event and the months of recovery and the years of watching someone else occupy the role that had been hers. She said she did not have bitterness about it. She had worked through whatever bitterness she had felt during the years of recovery and had come out the other side of it. What she had instead was a very clear sense of purpose. She had been the HOA president of Pinecrest Village since the night of the election, not in the official records, not in the functional governance of the community, but in the sense that the community had chosen her, had expressed its preference clearly, and that preference had been fraudulently overridden. Now, for years late, the preference was being honored. She intended to honor it back. Under Ruth's first year of leadership, Pinecrest Village adopted several governance reforms that had been recommended by the HOA attorney and by Marcus based on the lessons of the investigation. A financial oversight committee consisting of at minimum one financially credentialed member was established, with independent review authority over vendor invoices and the right to request original documentation at any time. Annual independent audits were mandated. All vendor contracts above a certain value required competitive bidding with board approval rather than presidential discretion. The fine schedule was restructured to require first offense written warnings in all circumstances, with graduated fine levels clearly specified, and any departure from the schedule requiring full board approval. A specific provision was added to the governance documents requiring that the managing company provide complete and specific election results to the board within 48 hours of any election, including named results for each position, with the managing company's representative attesting to the accuracy of the results. This provision was named, informally but consistently by everyone who discussed it at the board meeting, the Ruth provision. This story reveals something about HOA governance that I think is important and that we do not talk about enough on this channel, primarily because our stories usually focus on the abuse of power rather than the mechanisms that allow that abuse to persist undetected. The mechanism in this story was the gap between what the official record showed and what had actually happened, a gap that existed because of an incomplete transition process, an inadequately supervised management company, and a governance structure that trusted one person with enough authority and enough access that the fraud could be built before anyone noticed it. These gaps are not unique to Pinecrest Village. They exist in HOA communities across the United States because HOA governance is structurally dependent on the integrity of the individual people holding governance positions in ways that many homeowners do not fully appreciate. The board president of most HOA communities has a substantial amount of discretionary authority, particularly in vendor management, contract administration, and the day-to-day financial decisions that fall below dual signature thresholds. When the person in that role has integrity, this discretionary authority is fine. When the person in that role is Gloria, it is the operational infrastructure of a financial fraud. The first lesson is about election integrity. Ruth's election should have been impossible to misrepresent because the results should have been immediately, completely, and specifically documented and communicated to every relevant party, including the incoming board members themselves. The fact that the election night results were carried only in the incomplete summary that the transitioning management company representative produced, a summary that did not name the winners of individual positions, was the specific gap that Gloria exploited. Election results in HOA communities should be documented completely, specifically, and communicated directly to all candidates and all board members on the night of the election. The second lesson is about the management company's role and its limits. Management companies are administrative service providers. They process transactions, maintain records, and provide operational support. They are not auditors. They are not fraud investigators. They are not, in most cases, equipped or incentivized to catch financial irregularities in the governing body they serve. The management company in this story processed Gloria's invoice authorizations without question because Gloria's name was in their systems as president and the authorizations were within her designated authority level. They were not wrong to process the authorizations in that way. But the community was wrong to have its financial oversight structure dependent entirely on the management company's transactional processing. Financial oversight requires independent verification, and independent verification requires people with the knowledge and the standing to look behind the summary reports. Marcus was that person, and he found the problem, but he found it as a private citizen conducting an informal analysis rather than as part of a formal oversight structure. The investigation should not have required Marcus's specific professional expertise showing up in the community by chance. The oversight structure should have been designed to catch what Marcus caught, systematically and regularly, regardless of whether a forensic accountant happened to move in. The third lesson is about the power of the audit, not the management company's monthly financial report, which is a summary produced by the organization being overseen. An independent audit, conducted by an independent accounting professional with no relationship to the HOA administration, reviewing original documentation behind the summary numbers. The majority of HOA financial frauds are detected through audits. The majority of HOA financial frauds that run undetected for years run undetected because no one is conducting audits. The fourth lesson is about the community itself and its role in governance. 35 homeowners attended the election meeting at which Ruth was elected. 22 submitted proxy votes. 35 plus 22 is 57 out of a community of 112 households. Approximately half the community participated in the governance decision that would have the most direct and lasting impact on their lives for the next year. And the results of that election, which had been decided by the homeowners who participated, were then not followed up on by any of the 57 participants when the transition did not unfold in the expected way. Ruth called the management company. Ruth was told there was a discrepancy. And then Ruth had a medical emergency and the follow-up stopped. Nobody else who had been at the meeting or who had voted followed up. Nobody checked to make sure the election result was being honored. The community expressed its preference and then trusted that the system would implement that preference correctly. This trust was misplaced. It is usually the right trust. Most of the time, HOA election results are processed correctly and the person who wins the election becomes the president. But the specific mechanism of oversight that would ensure this, homeowners following up after the election to confirm that the result is being implemented correctly, is almost never in place because most homeowners do not think it needs to be. After the Ruth provision was adopted, it was. I want to spend a moment on the numbers in this story because I think they deserve attention in a way that the narrative arc can sometimes obscure. $312,000. That is the amount that was diverted from the Pinecrest Village HOA over approximately 28 months. Divided across 112 households, that is approximately $2,700 per household. Approximately $96 per month per household over the period of the scheme. The monthly dues were $280. So approximately 1/3 of every household's monthly dues payment during the period of the scheme went somewhere other than the community it was paid to support. The reserve fund, which should have been accumulating during Gloria's presidency, for the community's long-term capital needs was approximately $142,000 below where it should have been based on the community's reserve fund schedule. This shortfall represented deferred maintenance and capital replacement that the community would need to fund through additional assessments or special assessments in future years. The financial harm was not just what had been diverted. It was also what had not been invested. The $89,000 in elevated fine revenue. This number represents the cumulative financial penalty imposed on Pinecrest Village homeowners through Gloria's 300% increase in violation notice issuance. Approximately 80 of the 112 households had received at least one violation notice during Gloria's presidency. A substantial number had received multiple notices. The 31% determination that many of these notices were improperly issued meant that a significant portion of these homeowners had paid money they did not legitimately owe. And this is before accounting for the intangible harms. The anxiety of receiving violation notices for your home. The stress of disputes with the HOA board. The time spent dealing with HOA correspondence and appeals. The feeling experienced by many Pinecrest Village homeowners during Gloria's tenure that the community's enforcement environment had become hostile and arbitrary. These harms are real, even though they do not appear in the forensic accountant's report. The $192,000 recovery. 62 cents on the dollar. Better than typical for this type of situation. Genuinely a partial victory on the financial side. But also a reminder that when HOA fraud occurs at this scale, complete financial recovery is rarely achievable and the community bears a permanent cost. Marcus told me that when he calculated the final recovery number, he sat with it for a long time. He had been a forensic accountant for 15 years. He had investigated fraud cases where the recovery rate was significantly lower. He knew 62 cents on the dollar was a good outcome in this context. But he also knew that the $120,000 that was not recovered was money that had been paid in dues by 112 households. Money that families in this community had earned through their own work and had paid in good faith to support the community they lived in. Money that was gone because one person had exploited a governance gap and a management company's error and 4 years of insufficient financial oversight. He said he thought about that every time he drove through the neighborhood. I want to spend some time with Gloria because I think understanding her specifically is important for understanding the patterns we see in HOA fraud cases generally. Gloria was not a professional criminal. She did not move to Pinecrest Village with a plan to commit fraud. She was, by the accounts of people who knew her before the situation developed, a reasonably ordinary person with a specific set of personality characteristics that, in combination with a specific set of circumstances, produced what happened. The personality characteristics were familiar ones to anyone who has spent time studying HOA governance pathologies. A strong need for control. A tendency to experience institutional authority as an extension of personal identity. A specific ability to project competence and organization that made others comfortable deferring to her judgment. And an attitude toward rules that was instrumental rather than principled, meaning that she applied rules to others while treating them as optional for herself when they interfered with what she wanted to do. The circumstances were the fraud's specific opportunity. A governance gap in the election transition. A management company that made a procedural error and then buried it rather than disclosing it. A community with insufficient financial oversight. A board structure that gave the president substantial discretionary authority. A specific vendor who was willing to participate in the invoice inflation scheme. The combination of those personality characteristics and those circumstances produced a specific kind of escalation that I think is worth understanding. The initial act, the misrepresentation to Donna about the election result, was probably not planned as the first step in a long-term scheme. It was probably an impulsive response to losing an election that Gloria felt she should have won, a response that succeeded beyond what she might have rationally expected. When the management company accepted her representation without immediate challenge, when Ruth's health crisis created the vacancy that the tiebreaker provision filled in Gloria's favor, when the situation resolved into a legitimate appointment that officially overwrote the fraudulent period, Gloria found herself in a position she had wanted through a combination of audacity, and circumstance. The financial fraud came later. It developed after she was securely in position. It started small, probably, and grew as she discovered that the oversight mechanisms were not catching it. This is a pattern that forensic accountants see regularly. Financial fraud in organizations with weak oversight tends to start small and escalate because each successful transaction without detection reduces the fraudster's caution about the next one. By the time Marcus noticed the landscaping line item and submitted his first document request, Gloria had been operating for 28 months with no consequence for her financial conduct. She had been running the community effectively in its visible dimensions, maintaining the common areas, managing the vendors, running the meetings, and taking $312,000 from the accounts in the invisible dimensions. She had, in some functional sense, come to believe that this was sustainable, that the oversight was not coming, that the fraud was embedded deeply enough in the transaction history and the reporting format that nobody was going to find it. The moment she saw Marcus stand up in the September meeting with his folder and his questions, she knew. Whatever her expression showed in that moment, whatever the smooth and confident response she gave, she knew. Marcus was a forensic accountant asking the right questions in the right way, and she knew what that meant. She had 4 weeks between September and the special meeting in November when it all came out. For weeks in which she continued to come to board meetings and present financial reports and run the community while knowing that the investigation was developing. This is the thing about Gloria that I find most difficult to fully comprehend. Not the original fraud, the continuation, the ability to sit at the head of that table for 4 more weeks, knowing what she knew and perform the role as if nothing was different. This is a specific kind of compartmentalization that I think speaks to something important about the psychology of institutional authority fraud. The role had become so thoroughly integrated with her identity that she continued to perform it even after the performance had lost all strategic value. She was not buying time in those 4 weeks. There was no exit strategy. She was just continuing to be the HOA president because being the HOA president was who she had decided she was even after that decision had run its course. The attorney's advice apparently gave her the one piece of information she needed to finally stop. Her attorney presumably told her that the criminal exposure was significant and that the best available path forward required cooperation rather than continued performance. She resigned. She stopped. But the performance had run for 4 years and 3 months before that. The community's response to the revelation of what had happened was the response of a community that had been genuinely harmed and needed time and process to understand the full scale of what it had experienced. Patricia's communication to all homeowners, sent the morning after the special board meeting, was comprehensive and carefully written. It described what had been found. It described the criminal referral. It described the board's actions. It committed to complete transparency going forward, including the release of the full investigation report, redacted only to protect non-party individuals named in its exhibits. It announced the appointment of a new management company and the timeline for the transition. It provided contact information for homeowners with questions. The community meeting that Patricia called 3 weeks later, after the criminal referral had been formalized and the new management company had begun its transition, was attended by 84 of the 112 households. It was the largest community meeting in Pinecrest Village's history. The questions were what you would expect. How did this happen? How long was it going on? How much was taken? What is being recovered? What is being done to prevent it from happening again? Will we get our money back? What about the fines? What about Gloria? What about Dennis? Patricia and Marcus and the HOA attorney answered every question. Some of the answers were not what people wanted to hear. The recovery was 62 cents on the dollar. The criminal process would take time, and the outcome was not fully predictable. Not every fine paid during the Gloria era had been identified as improper. Some of the financial harm would be borne permanently by the community. There was anger in that room. Genuine, documented, completely understandable anger from people who had paid dues in good faith and had their money stolen. From people who had paid fines that had been inflated to fund a fraud cover story. From people who had lived in the community for years trusting that the people governing it were doing so honestly. There is also, alongside the anger, something else. A kind of galvanized community energy that I find genuinely interesting in HOA communities that have experienced something like this and come out the other side of it. The energy of a community that has looked directly at what inadequate governance and insufficient oversight produces and has decided, collectively and with real commitment, that it is not going to produce that again. Marcus was on the new Financial Oversight Committee. Patricia stayed on as acting president until Ruth's election. Harold sent a letter from Florida that was read aloud at the community meeting, a letter in which he described the election night result and apologized for not following up when the transition had not unfolded as he expected. Several people in the audience cried when Harold's letter was read. Not all of them, not a majority, but some, because it confirmed what the investigation had found, that the community had chosen correctly, that the preference had been expressed honestly and clearly, and that the expression of that preference had been stolen by one person's audacity and one organization's failure to catch it. I want to close the substantive section of this story with something specific and practical for every homeowner in every HOA community who is listening to this. Because the horror of this story is compelling, but the horror without the practical lesson is just entertainment. And I'm not in the business of entertainment about things that affect real people's real money and real lives. The first practical lesson is know the election process in your community. Read your bylaws. Understand who administers the election. Understand how results are documented and communicated. On election night, make sure the results are announced publicly and that you know who has won each position by name. If the results are not publicly announced and documented that night, ask why. Follow up after the election to confirm that the transition is proceeding in accordance with the announced results. Do not assume the system will work correctly without verification. The specific fraud at the center of this story was only possible because nobody verified. The second practical lesson is understand your community's financial oversight structure. Know whether an independent audit is conducted annually. Know who has signatory authority on what types of transactions. Know whether vendor contracts go through competitive bidding or whether they are at presidential discretion. If you have a financially credentialed background, consider whether you have a responsibility to participate in your community's financial oversight. Marcus did not plan to be the person who caught a financial fraud when he moved into Pinecrest Village. He just read the financial reports the way a forensic accountant reads financial reports and followed the thread. The community was lucky he moved in. Most communities do not get that lucky. The third practical lesson is that management companies are not auditors. They are administrative service providers. They process what they are authorized to process. They report what they are designed to report. They are not your financial protection. Your financial protection is independent oversight conducted by people with financial credentials and with no organizational relationship to the HOA administration. If your community does not have this, it should. The fourth practical lesson is about the specific vulnerability of the presidential role. In most HOA communities, the president has more discretionary authority than any other board member. They have more access to information. They have more vendor relationships. They have more opportunities to act without immediate oversight. This is appropriate when the president has integrity. It is catastrophically dangerous when the president does not. The structural safeguard is not to limit the president's necessary authority, but to ensure that the exercise of that authority is subject to meaningful and regular independent oversight. The threshold for dual signature requirements. The scope of competitive bidding requirements. The frequency and depth of financial reviews. These specific parameters matter, and most homeowners do not know what they are in their own community's governing documents. The fifth, and perhaps most important practical lesson, is about attendance and participation. 57 of 112 Pinecrest Village households participated in the election that should have made Ruth president. The other 55 did not participate. If more had participated, the margin would have been larger. A larger margin would have been harder to misrepresent. If more had participated and more had followed up after the election, the misrepresentation would have been immediately challenged by multiple people rather than just one person who then became unavailable due to illness. Your HOA governs your home and your money and the quality of your daily life. The people who govern it are determined by the homeowners who participate in governance. The oversight of those people is conducted by the homeowners who show up and ask questions and read the financial reports and request supporting documentation. The protection of your community from what happened at Pinecrest Village is not the management company's job. It is not the attorney's job. It is your job and your neighbor's job, collectively, as the community that the HOA is supposed to serve. Be the community that deserves the governance it has. Show up. Vote. Read the reports. Ask the questions. Be Marcus. And if you need to be Marcus, for the love of everything, please be a forensic accountant. I visited Pinecrest Village on a cold November afternoon about 14 months after the special board meeting that ended Gloria's presidency. The community looked exactly as it always had from the outside. The stone entrance pillars with the brushed metal lettering. The seasonal plantings, replaced for fall with ornamental kale and mums. The well-maintained streets under the bare-branched mature trees. Ruth met me at the community pool building, which was closed for the season, but which she used as a meeting space for the neighborhood watch committee that she had also organized in her first year as president. She was 62 years old, completely well, carrying the specific energy of someone who has found their place and is using it. She told me about the first year of her presidency, the governance reforms, the new management company, the financial oversight committee, the election results protocol. She told me about the community meeting where Harold's letter was read. She told me about the homeowners who had come to her after that meeting to apologize for not following up after the original election, to tell her they should have checked, to tell her they were sorry she had not been able to serve those 4 years. She told me she had told each of them the same thing, that she was not interested in regret looking backward, that the community had chosen well originally and had chosen well again, and that the question now was only what kind of community they were going to build going forward. She showed me the governance documents, the Financial Oversight Committee Charter, the election results protocol, the independent audit requirement, the amended dual signature threshold, the competitive bidding requirements, the reserve fund schedule, and a new funding plan to address the shortfall from the diverted funds. She said the reserve fund would be restored to its target level in approximately 6 years, assuming no additional special assessments and consistent annual dues contributions. She said this was not ideal, but it was manageable and it was honest. She said one more thing as I was leaving. She said she thought about Gloria occasionally, not with bitterness. She had worked through whatever bitterness the situation had earned. What she thought about was the specific quality of what Gloria had stolen. Not the $312,000, though that was significant. Not the 4 years of the presidency she had won and never served, though that was real. What she thought about was simpler than that. She had been the HOA president of Pinecrest Village since the night of the election. Every homeowner who voted that night had expressed their preference, and that preference was the community's voice. Gloria had not stolen from Ruth specifically. She had stolen from the community, from a specific democratic process by which 112 households express their collective preference about how they want to be governed. That was the thing, not the money, not the role, the voice. She had her voice back now, and the community had its voice back, and that was the thing she was going to spend her presidency honoring. This is the HOA files. In this case, the story of an HOA president who was never president, who fined her neighbors and stole from her community and occupied a role that was not hers for 4 years, is one of the most extraordinary cases we have ever covered. Not for the drama, not for the crane, not for the rock through the window, for what it reveals about the specific vulnerability of HOA governance to the specific kind of person who is willing to exploit every gap they find. The gaps are real. They exist in communities across America. The election processes that are not fully verified. The management companies that are not auditors. The financial oversight structures that depend on summary reports rather than original documentation. The community participation rates that leave governance decisions to whoever shows up. These gaps do not require Gloria to exist. They are structural vulnerabilities in the way HOA governance is typically designed and typically operated. Ruth is fixing the gaps in her community. She is fixing them systematically, with the specific competence of someone who spent 20 years as a hospital administrator managing complex organizations and who understands that good governance is not about the people at the top being honest. It is about building systems that function correctly regardless of whether the people at the top are honest. That is the lesson. Not trust your board president. Audit your board president. Verify your elections. Review the invoices. Show up to the meetings. Read the financial reports. Be Marcus. Know your rights. Document everything. Build the oversight your community deserves. And make sure, when you vote for your HOA president, that someone follows up to make sure the right person actually gets the job. This has been the HOA Files. Subscribe for new cases every week. If this story affected you, share it with every HOA homeowner you know. Drop your story in the comments, and I will see you in the next one.